Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills, as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it.
Let us now pray. O Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Members, you may be seated.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by the presiding officer.
Honorable members, I have received leave of absence from the Chief Secretary, Assemblyman Farley Augustine, and from Assemblyman Terence Bain. The leave are granted. Before we start, I will ask that all phones be placed on silent. You could take 5 minutes to do so. Okay. I would also ask the gentleman in the gallery to please remove your glasses. Thank you. Clerk?
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. petitions, papers.
Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy.
This morning, Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of July 2024.
Presentation of reports from 1, the Dispute Resolution Commission, 2, select committees, Chief Secretary's questions, questions to secretaries, questions for oral answer.
Question 240, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 240 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation, Councillor Tashia Boris.
Councillor Boris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. As it relates to the Tobago Carnival to be held in October 2024, can the Secretary indicate the following: A, the total budget for the Carnival; B, the cost of the promotional roadshow implemented at various locations in Trinidad; C, whether or not this roadshow was a success and why; and D, the total cost to procure the branded bus for the roadshow and whether or not the bus was present at all locations. Madam Presiding Officer, excuse me, the allocation this fiscal for the Tobago October Carnival 2024 is $8,980,495.80. With respect to B, the cost of the promotional roadshow, the figure that I have here not only includes Trinidad, but other activations in Grenada and Tobago. The total cost of that roadshow, which was those 3 areas, is $1,411,648.57. See whether or not this roadshow was a success. Yes, it was a resounding success. With respect to the Trinidad activations, the team at the Festivals Commission interacted with a total of 37,471 persons across 5 locations: Point Fortin, San Fernando, Chaguanas, Port of Spain, and Ariapita Avenue. These persons they interacted with when they were creating content for the carnival, people on the street, people who asked questions, and persons who were in cars collecting flyers and interacting with the promotional team. The total cost to procure the branded bus for the roadshow was $526,334.55, and yes, the bus was present at all locations during the activation. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Minority Councillor. Question 242, Assemblyman Morris.
Question 242 to the Secretary of Agriculture.
I don't see Secretary Panton here. Leader of Assembly Business, can you give account for Secretary Panton?
Madam Presiding Officer, can we defer the question until I can get in contact with Assemblyman Charles Panton, please? Thank you.
So granted. Question 245, Assemblyman Morris.
Question 245 to the Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy.
Presiding Officer, the question asks relates to the operations of EID cut, and if I can indicate the status of the recruitment process. On June 1st, there was a newly appointed and constituted board of EID cut. And during the first 3 months of the operations of the board, they reviewed and assessed the performance of the acting CEO, and the board came to a decision that they would have confirmed her as CEO in the position effective 1st September 2024.
Follow-up, Assemblyman Morris.
Madam Presiding Officer, is the Secretary confirming that there was no open process to recruit the CEO of EID Cut?
Secretary Roberts.
I'm not saying that there was no open process. There was a process prior where the person acted as CEO. The board reviewed the performance of the person who was acting from 2023, and the board made a decision based on the performance of the CEO to confirm the person in the position. From January 2023, the person acted from January 2023 to August 2024. I cannot confirm, though, prior to September 24, what was the process of appointing the person as acting CEO.
Assemblyman Morris, follow up.
During the process of review, was the position ever advertised publicly?
Secretary Roberts.
Madam Presiding Officer, allow me to get the responses to that at a subsequent time. I don't have the response to that right now.
Follow up. Assemblyman Morris.
Are you comfortable, Madam Secretary, with a process where you have an acting CEO who was interim based on a directorship on a board being seamlessly moved into the position of CEO without a process?
Secretary Roberts.
There was a process. I'm not saying that there was no process. But what I am saying is, as Secretary of Finance, the holder of the position is well qualified. There is absolutely no reason to question her performance at this time. And therefore, as Secretary of Finance, I don't have an issue with the performance of the CEO.
Thank you. We would move forward, allow for Secretary Pantin to settle. We would move to question 246, Assemblyman Morris.
Question 246 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation.
Secretary Morris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. As it relates to the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, can the Secretary indicate what is the status of the promised recruitment of the substantive CEO? Madam Presiding Officer, the process to recruit a substantive CEO for the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited is currently ongoing. Thank you.
Follow up. Assemblyman Morris.
Madam Presiding Officer, the previous CEO demitted office in and around 2022. We are in 2024.
Question, Assemblyman Morris.
The question is, why for such a serious and important agency which speaks to the heart and beat and the essence of Tobago, our tourism, why is it taking over 2 years to appoint a substantive CEO? Why?
Secretary Morris.
Madam Presiding Officer, unfortunately, we have been experiencing challenges in getting a best fit candidate for the position. Very much unlike other mature tourism destinations, Tobago does not offer a competitive compensation for a position such as CEO of the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited. At this time, the board is in the process of engaging an HR consultant for us to go back out for a CEO, and it is our hope that this time we will get someone who is able to take the helm at the agency. Thank you.
Follow up, Assemblyman Morris.
Madam Presiding Officer, and the comparison is clear. How is it that a PNM administration...
Leader of Assembly Business. Minority Leader.
How is it that a PNM administration was able to recruit the caliber of a Louis Lewis, who is now back in St.
Assemblyman
Lucia,
Morris, can I have the question, please?
The question is, how is it that the PNM could have found a credible candidate and you cannot?
Madam Presiding Officer, unfortunately, the Secretary is not responsible for the recruitment process. That is one. Two, Mr. Louis Lewis was appointed in 2017 or 2018, thereabouts. We have lived through an entire pandemic. Everything has gone up. And certainly to attract tourism professionals of caliber, Tobago must be able to pay according to market rate. But with our decreased allocation, cuts in development budget, cuts all over, Madam Presiding Officer, we unfortunately cannot attract the kind of talent and pay them what is required to keep them on the island. Once again, the process is ongoing. I trust that the board will do its due diligence to ensure that we get a suitable candidate to fill the role. In the interim, we have a CEO sitting in the chair. The agency is not without leadership. The person who is the current interim CEO has a long-standing career in the tourism sector. She worked at the division under every single Secretary of Tourism that has sat in that chair in the last 21 years. She is eminently qualified to hold the fort until such time as the process is completed. Thank you.
Final follow-up, my Assemblyman Morris.
Well, if the interim is so qualified as the
Question, Assemblyman
If the
Morris.
interim is so qualified, how come she's not just the CEO? Because we saw in EID cut you made the acting the CEO. How come she's not the CEO?
Question, Assemblyman Morris.
This question is, if she's qualified, why not is she employed as the CEO, the substantive CEO? Engaged as the substantive CEO. Why?
Secretary Boris.
Madam Presiding Officer, I think I sat in this chamber just now when the minority raised a concern over the process to appoint someone who was acting as CEO in the position of CEO and questioned whether a process took place. Here is he now asking if the same thing cannot be done. I think the minority leader needs to pick his battles wisely and ensure that what he wants to ask is what he really wants an answer for. At this time, as I will repeat, the process is ongoing. We will do what we have to do to get a substantive CEO. The agency remains under committed, qualified leadership in the interim until that process is completed. Thank you.
Question 247, Assemblyman Morris.
Question 247 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Social Protection.
Secretary B. Israel.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. 247. What is the status of the incinerators owned by the TRHA? The TRHA currently owns 2 incinerators. Are they all functioning? No, one was decommissioned in 2023 and one is functional. Have private services been procured to provide the service to date to cost? Yes, private services have been procured, and the date to cost is $8.596 million.
Follow-up, Assemblyman Morris.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary tell us why was the one of the incinerators decommissioned and why we are now paying $8.4 million in that service when we could have had the incinerator?
One question, minority.
So the question is, why was it decommissioned in preference for paying $8 million, almost $9 million to a Trinidad contractor?
Secretary B. Israel.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The incinerators the incinerator was decommissioned because it was at the end of its life. I'm sure many of us who are in the public would remember smoke emanating from up the fort myriad of times, indicating that it was not working as it should. Several attempts were made at fixing. Several costly attempts were made at fixing, which did not work, Madam Presiding Officer. But to truly answer the question, Madam Presiding Officer, I would ask the members of this House and the viewing public to go back to a moment during COVID, Madam Presiding Officer, when I, as a minority councillor at that time, walked up the fort, Madam Presiding Officer, and discovered that there was a situation where biohazardous materials were not being treated with at that time, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, I am the one who took the video. I am the one who posted the video on Facebook. I am the one that forced them to tell us at that time that there was somewhat of a backlog, Madam Presiding Officer, and that they were treating with it. They had also indicated, Madam Presiding Officer, that there was a microwavable incinerator that should be working and so forth. All of that happened, Madam Presiding Officer. To my surprise, Madam Presiding Officer, when I became Secretary with responsibility for health, wellness, and social protection, I got a call, a whistleblower maybe, somebody from the TRHA who said, Madam Secretary, I think you need to make a visit to the old fort where the incinerator is housed. I think you should make a visit. And Madam Presiding Officer, I obliged. I went, I took a look at the facility, recognizing that what was stored at the fort, Madam Presiding Officer, was probably up to 5, possibly 10 years worth of biohazardous material, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, when we looked at the rooms, if you know the old fort, the old hospital, Madam Presiding Officer, when we look at the rooms that were the mortuary, if you look at the rooms that were the storage for the dispensary, if you look at the buildings that were above that, Madam Presiding Officer, we actually recognized that there was, in addition to all of those rooms being filled with biohazardous material, Madam Presiding Officer, that there was also a 40-foot container that was also filled with biohazardous material, Madam Presiding Officer. So when we recognized what was happening, and of course, as we indicated, Madam Presiding Officer, that the incinerator was at the end of its life and it could not work, we recognized that something needed to happen, Madam Presiding Officer. So the private contractor, Madam Presiding Officer, is actually doing 2 sets of incinerating. The contractor is incinerating the backlog in addition to current waste. As a matter of fact, we recognize, Madam Presiding Officer, that the rooms that we saw, Madam Presiding Officer, that were filled at that time, Madam Presiding Officer, weren't even all of the rooms. Because we learned after, Madam Presiding Officer, that if you go upstairs, the said building, Madam Presiding Officer, all of those rooms, rooms were filled. So we are completing that process, Madam Presiding Officer.
Assemblyman Morris, I don't need your support. I think I could handle it, Chair. Thanks. And your question, I believe, has been answered in its entirety. Follow-up question, Assemblyman Morris.
So, Madam, after that long-winded explanation, I simply want to know, what is the cost to operationalize an incinerator? Because I'm hearing you paid over $9 million. So
question, Assemblyman Morris.
Tobago, we want to know what is the cost to operationalize our own incinerator, the one that we will own.
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm not sure that that was one of the questions there, so I cannot give you the cost of what it would cost us to operationalize. However, Madam Presiding...
Continue.
However, Madam Presiding Officer, I guess this may be a good time to announce that we have actually procured a new incinerator that I understand landed in Trinidad recently that needs to be installed and so forth. So I cannot provide the answer in terms of what it will cost because I do not have that information at this point since it was not one of the questions, I don't think, on the order.
Follow-up, Assemblyman Morris.
So we've purchased an incinerator and we don't know how much we pay for it. Is that what the Secretary is saying? I just want confirmation.
Question, is that your question?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Secretary B. Israel.
Yes, Madam Presiding Officer, as I indicated, the question was what is the overall cost of providing the service, and I have indicated that since that was not one of the questions, I am not prepared to answer that question at this point, and no, I do not know the cost of the incinerator that we purchased off the top.
Thank you. Question 248, Minority Councillor.
Officer, question 248 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, Assemblyman Dr. Faith B. Israel.
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Thank you again, Madam Presiding Officer. Question: how many maternal and fetal deaths occurred between the 6th of December 2021 to present at the TRHA? Madam Presiding Officer, according to the information I have, we've had 2 maternal deaths. Fetal deaths can be categorized as 2 separate categories. So we've had stillbirths, which are babies that were born dead, for want of a better term. We have 19 of those, and we have 10 neonatal deaths, which are deaths of a baby that was born alive and subsequently died. Yeah. Was the investigative process followed? As far as I am aware, we have been following Section 12 of the Ministry of Health requirements, and we have also been following the Pan American Adverse Events Policy guidelines that are used to investigate these types of incidents. What are the outcomes of the investigations into these deaths? I do not have the information in terms of the outcomes. The investigations were complete. I do not have the information in terms of the investigation for every one of these. And I envision, Madam Presiding Officer, that in many instances, the outcomes would be protected as it relates to medical privacy and stuff like that. So I do not envision that we will go down the road too much, Madam Presiding Officer, of trying to dig into the investigative part of this because of the sensitivity of the topics.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor? No? Okay. Question 249, Minority Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. 249 to the Secretary of Finance, Trade and Economy, Councillor Petal and Roberts.
Secretary Roberts?
Presiding Officer, the question asks about the unspent balances for the years ending 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. The unspent balances that I wish to report for fiscal 2021 was 65,488,470. For end of fiscal 2022, 113,319,559. At the end of fiscal 2023, the unspent balances was 133,361,471. And we do not have a final unspent balances for fiscal 2024 because, as you would appreciate, we have a manual system and we are still doing reconciliations. But the unspent balances so far is estimated at $121 million.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor?
Presiding Officer, can the Secretary indicate in terms of the unspent balances what they were expended on?
Secretary Roberts?
Balances, and I only came with that response.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, what we recognize is that the unspent balances from 2021 to 2023 would have increased over the 3 years.
Do you have a question, Minority Councillor?
Yes. I am putting it in context, Madam Presiding Officer. We have heard the administration speaking to underfunding and lack of resources coming from the central government. If that is the case, Madam Presiding Officer, why do we see an increase in unspent balances between 2021 to 2022 and 2022 to 2023?
Secretary Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And whilst you're hearing from the other side about management of the resources, this administration had to take a deliberate step to withhold funds or not release funds so that the unspent balances will look like this in order to supplement and fund CPEP and URP, because we would have inherited a bill of CPEP and URP over the years, and this really includes the wages of these workers. So it has increased, and that is deliberately so, because we have to fund these projects, and we have not received any increases for these programs since we have come into office. Even with public sector workers getting an increase of $2, we have not seen an increase in CPEP and URP from central government. So we have to now manage how we take care of each fiscal going forward. So right now, this assembly, in its prioritization process, we have to also look at fiscal 2026 and how we're going to fund these programs. And that is why you're seeing an increase in unspent balances. Also, Madam Presiding Officer, I'd like to say that the current process of the assembly being so manual, it's a bit difficult to spend each and every cent at the end of the year, and this is part of the problem in terms of why we have unspent balances.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary in the previous follow-up said that she could not indicate what the unspent balance was used for. And now the Secretary is saying they had to pay CPEP and URP workers. Which is it? Is it that
I'm sure there's a question inside there somewhere.
Yeah, yes, Madam Presiding Officer. I'm wondering whether or not the Secretary knows or she does not know.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Madam Presiding Officer, in the previous follow-up, the Secretary indicated that she was not prepared or she does not know what the unspent balances were utilized for. In asking the question why it increased, the Secretary now says that it increased because they are prioritizing the payment of URP and CPEP. Which is it, Madam President? Is the Secretary unaware or is there a prioritization?
Secretary Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The councillor, minority councillor, asked what it was spent on. It wasn't only spent on URP and CPEP. You want me to go back to 21, 22, 23. If you want me to answer a question in totality, I'll have to bring all the data. CPEP and URP only forms part of the funding of the unspent balances. And if you want me to respond, I have to respond completely. If I say CPEP and URP, it is not only funding CPEP and URP. It funded CPEP and URP, yes, but that was not all that was funded, and if that is the question, Madam Presiding Officer, can you allow me to answer at a subsequent time in totality of what 2021, 2022, 2023 unspent balances was used to fund?
I would allow you to submit your detailed response in writing to the minority.
Certainly, Madam Presiding Officer.
Leader's office through the office of the clerk. Question 250, Minority Councillor.
Question 250 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, Assemblyman Dr. Faith B. Israel.
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Thank you again, Madam Presiding Officer. The status of the procurement of the new ambulances that were estimated to be delivered in September 2024. 4 ambulances, Madam Presiding Officer, have arrived in Trinidad, 3 in July and 1 in September 2024. They are currently being cleared and configured for use. They are being cleared, configured for use, and currently awaiting approval from the Ministry of Health, consistent with the Emergency Ambulance Services and Emergency Medical Personnel Act 8 of 2009. It is estimated that the 4 ambulances will be operational in November because that process seems to be moving along as swiftly as it can. 8 additional ambulances have also been ordered and are being manufactured in the country of origin, and they are estimated to come in soon. What is the total cost incurred for the ambulances that we are leasing? Total cost thus far is $4.347 million.
Follow up, Minority Councillor. We would revert to question 240. No, apologies. 242. Assemblyman Morris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question 242 to the Secretary of Food Production.
Assemblyman Panton, Charles Panton.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Madam Presiding Officer. Question is in relation to the Scarborough Abattoir. Can the Secretary indicate the following? When was the abattoir closed? What is the reason for its closure? When will it be reopened to members of the public? Will affected butchers and farmers be compensated for the inconvenience and loss of earnings due to the prolonged closure of this critical facility? Madam Presiding Officer, this old decrepit abattoir that I inherited from the PNM was closed on the 19th of February 2024 due to the effects of the oil spill on the personnel there. There was an acrid, unbearable scent which permeated the entire compound. This old decrepit abattoir that the PNM left for us to manage was then reopened in May of this year, but subsequent to that, there were cracks throughout the building, which needed to be repaired, and the sewer system became non-functional. To remain compliant with the Procurement Act that was approved in Parliament by the PNM and is responsible for some of the delays in the system, the procurement unit began the procurement process to engage a contractor to fix these cracks and other parts of the building. So far, the cracks have been repaired, Madam Presiding Officer, and the sewer system is now about to be fixed. It is estimated by the marketing manager that by the end of the first week of November, the facility will be reopened. As it relates to the other questions, Madam Presiding Officer, there is no requirement or no precedent of compensation for inconvenience and loss of earnings due to any facility under the Division of Food Security whenever it is shut down. The minority knows very well that the Assembly, with its limited allocation, cannot possibly facilitate that. Maybe the minority cannot press upon its colleagues in Trinidad to send more money to the division. Madam Presiding Officer, recently the Prime Minister endorsed what I said when I got into office, that agriculture is indeed a business, yeah? And that took place in the Scarborough Library. And with any successful business, heavy dependency should not be placed on government assets, because if they shut down, then your business stops. So that is the reason why we are encouraging persons to become self-sufficient in business, right? So in the event of unforeseen circumstances, business continues. So that's why millions of dollars are placed into grants and incentives. And unfortunately, most of these grants and incentives, they are distributed from Trinidad. We play a little role here. So technical support is also provided by divisions to ensure best practices as well during backyard farming and slaughtering to keep this tradition safe. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Follow-up, Assemblyman Morris.
Follow-up. So the Secretary indicated that it was affected by the oil spill. You would think a caring Secretary would utilize the provisions of the oil spill.
Question, Assemblyman Morris.
Why, through the provisions of the oil spill, a Secretary who is caring for her agriculture, butchers, and farmers did not use that opportunity to make claims for those butchers and farmers?
Secretary Panton.
I don't understand the question.
Can you reiterate your question, please?
The question is elucidly clear. You said the oil spill was the reason for the shutting down.
Question,
And
Assemblyman
there's a provision
Morris.
for persons to make claims who were affected by the oil spill. So why did the division, through your leadership, not facilitate that process?
Madam Presiding Officer, the minority would have to say claims, explain what they will be claiming for. Elaborate some more. What they should claim for. What would be the parameters we're looking for? Tell me, what should they claim for?
I would answer. I would answer. So,
This is a question
yes,
and
I
answer
will answer the
segment.
question because I'm the
No,
secretary,
no,
and I'll help her to do her work.
Assemblyman Morris, have a seat. This is a question to secretaries segment. We are all clear about that. Ask the question, answer the question. Can I have a question, please?
So when the chief secretary turns, I'll ask him for the work of the secretary of agriculture because clearly
Question,
I know how to, all right, so let me
Assemblyman
explain to her.
Morris.
Let me explain to her. You said the question speaks of loss of earning. If you lost earning due to an oil spill, then you have a legitimate claim. So the question is, if you have a legitimate claim, why isn't it the division facilitating that claim?
Secretary Panton.
Madam Presiding Officer, I don't know of any claims being made pertaining to the oil spill from persons utilizing the abattoir. As a matter of fact, no claims were lodged on my desk. So unless they came to the minority to lodge a complaint, and that's something different. He didn't communicate that complaint. But outside of that, I did say that farmers, traditionally, they do backyard slaughtering and farming, and public health, the veterinary public health inspector, and the other divisions ensure that they know how to slaughter safely. So he would have to explain in a very transparent way how taxpayers' money should be spent to fill these claims.
Follow-up question, Assemblyman Morris.
Farmers know who cared for them.
Clerk. Clerk.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by secretaries and assistant secretaries. Personal explanations. Introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary. Private business. Motion.
Assemblyman Morris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, as I begin, I would like to beg your approval understanding in order for the 2-6 for me to read the majority of the contents of my speech. Madam Presiding Officer, contrary to those on the other side.
So granted.
Thank you so much. Contrary to those on the other side, after having 20 opportunities to speak to the people of Tobago on this most important topic of autonomy, they have failed in their mandate to treat with the autonomy issue in this House. And therefore, it takes a responsible minority with a passion for Tobago for us to once and for all treat with this matter inside of this House where it should be treated. So after 2-3 years, not 1 ounce of action. You have the Chief Secretary disrespecting the House, sending all kind of things down to Parliament. Who approved that? Yet, not 1 inkling of word in this House on the matter of autonomy. And that reminds me, Madam Presiding Officer, today we stand at a crossroads, a moment that mirrors the journeys many of us take in life. I'm reminded of a story of 2 travelers, both embarking on a long and difficult path. One traveler, consumed by the pursuit of perfection, refused to move until the conditions were flawless. He wanted the clearest skies, the smoothest road, and every obstacle removed. And so, this traveler, he stood waiting, watching, while his journey remained stagnant. The other traveler, though aware the road ahead, bit winding and imperfect, took each step as it came. He understood that progress often comes in increments, not all at once. It's seldomly achieved in one flight. But this traveler, he advanced step by step closer to his destination, while the first traveler remained where he began. Today, Madam Presiding Officer, we in Tobago face a similar choice. We can either gamble, waiting for perfection that may never come, or we can choose to secure real progress for Tobago by, in the first instance, supporting the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill. These bills may not be perfect, but which bill ever is? And I recall in the presence, Madam Presiding Officer, of both the Leader of Assembly Business and your good self, the former clerk of the Parliament said to us, based on her years of experience, is that this Tobago Amendment Constitutional Bill and this Tobago Island Government Bill are but two of the best pieces of legislation she has ever worked on in her entire parliamentary career. Madam Presiding Officer, it is against this backdrop that these bills represent a giant step forward in the pursuit of self-governance. And with the Prime Minister's recent announcement that the two Tobago bills will soon be put to a vote, I stand proud as a Tobago-born and bred patriot to present this motion, which stands in my name and which reads as follows. Whereas the Tobago House of Assembly is constitutionally mandated to govern and manage the affairs of Tobago in accordance with Act 40 of 1996, and whereas Act 40 of 1996 provided enhanced authority to the Tobago House of Assembly, its provisions have not yet delivered the full level of autonomy sought by Tobagonians. And whereas for over 3 decades, successive efforts to achieve consensus both within and outside Parliament have failed to secure the passage of bills that would grant Tobago the desired autonomy. And whereas the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has announced the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament, and whereas these bills represent a historic step forward, proposing substantive improvements to Tobago's autonomy and authority, including the establishment of the Tobago Legislature and the entrenchment of core provisions for Tobago's self-governance. Be it resolved that this House acknowledges that the provisions of these bills will have a far-reaching and positive impact on the powers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the quality of life for all Tobagonians. Be it further resolved that this House unequivocally supports the swift and unhindered passage of these bills into law, recognizing that any further delay would perpetuate the long-standing disenfranchisement of the people of Tobago. And be it further resolved that this House endorses all necessary actions to ensure the passage of these bills, including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the Tobago House of Assembly and members of the Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment without further amendment. And Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to indicate my colleague, Councillor Petal Daniel Benoit, will make a minor amendment to this motion to change the word amendment to delay, to keep within the spirit of us having those bipartisan consultations. Madam Presiding Officer, in 1980, I was in Yettarong to witness the foundation of the Tobago House of Assembly, laid by giants like Dr. Winston Murray and Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson. By 1996, as a student now entering Bishop's High School, I watched from the sidelines as patriots like Mr. Hochoy Charles carried the mantle securing the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996. Later, as I matured, I became more aware of the efforts of leaders like Mr. Orville London, Mr. Stanford Calendar, and Mr. Kelvin Charles, who continued the fight. Now, standing here today, I recognize that we have the unique privilege to do more than simply observe. We can, in fact, act. We can shape the successful passage of these bills and move Tobago closer to true self-government. Madam Presiding Officer, I therefore urge my colleagues not to remain stagnant as that traveler, waiting for perfection. Let us divorce ourselves from our political colors. Let us put on our Tobago hats, unite today, move forward, and signal to the Parliament that Tobago is ready to secure its progress together. Madam Presiding Officer, as the saying goes, those who fail to recognize history are doomed to repeat it. Understanding our past is crucial. This unity, and I want to repeat this, Madam Presiding Officer, this unity only leads to derailed progress, while unity gives us the best chance at success. Madam Presiding Officer, I beseech us all to reflect on the journey that has brought us to the Tobago Constitution Amendment Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago House of Assembly currently operates under Act 40 of 1996, which, while beneficial, is inadequate for Tobago's self-governance. That is a fact. Madam Presiding Officer, since then, there has been a growing consensus among all Tobagonians about the need for reform. And that goes across party lines. In 2007, I think it was then Minority Leader, Mr. Ashworth Jack, who brought forth a motion emphasizing the urgency of addressing Tobago's autonomy. And a responsible PNM administration accepted that the motion had credence and credibility, and therefore, at that pivotal moment, the People's National Movement, you see the picture, working together, step forward, prioritize Tobago's aspirations, and committed to a process for autonomy. That is the history. From 2007 to 2013, a collaborative process, and I want for the listening Tobagonians to understand where we would have been successful and where we would have failed. So every time there was collaboration, we were able to make incremental steps towards the final destination. And every time there's disunity and division, we make steps back, we reverse, or remain stagnant. So this collaborative process emerged where major political parties and Tobagonians worked together to draft, and I think at that time was the John Prince Committee bills in the furtherance of self-government for Tobago, highlighting the importance of unity in voicing our needs. Madam Presiding Officer, I want the people of Tobago to follow. However, in that very year of 2013, there was an election. And a setback occurred when the same Mr. Jack, who brought the motion in 2007, decided for his own selfish political ambitions to break away from the THA process, that all the political parties were united in moving forward. And he established a process with his People's Partnership friends, the UNC, in Trinidad. And they literally hijacked the established process and undermined the Tobago House of Assembly approved bills. So bills that were approved right here in this house were ignored by the Kamala Persad-Bissau regime. And that's why I cringe, Madam Presiding Officer, at these younglings and those who weren't following the politics that is somehow promoting this Kamala bill like if it was some kind of savior to Tobago, when it was the height of disrespect. Because here it was that the Tobago House of Assembly initiated a process among Tobagonians right here in Tobago, and they abandoned, ignored that process, and attempted just weeks before an election to shove a process down the throats of Tobagonians. That is what is shoving. And then you try to put forward this thing that they were giving 8%. And again, I said they weren't following the politics of Tobago. Because if they read that bill, they would recognize that that 8% was the cap. But they didn't tell you what was the floor. So that was the ceiling. But it was 6.9%. So what they did was lock you into, again, a threshold. And if you are making progress, you had a threshold of 4.03% and 6.9%, and the history has showed over time, notwithstanding no matter who is in power at the central government, you get closer to the floor, your lowest threshold. And therefore, for you to tout that we were going to get 8% from Kamala is quite foolish, when the floor is 6.9. So it means if you're following the history and the trend, if we were to approve that bill, you would get almost close to 6.9%. And here we are. These bills guarantees Tobago that very 6.8%, but that is... Thank you. Guarantees Tobago that 6.8%, but you know what, Madam Presiding Officer? It does not put a cap on how high or how far or how much Tobago could get. So on any given day, Tobago could get 20% because there's nothing. Oh, let's sit down and learn something now. We're hard head. Madam Presiding Officer, I would retract and simply say you all are behaving like children. So, Madam Presiding Officer, and the daddy over here, and I'm sure he's disappointed of his children and their behavior. Madam Presiding Officer, notwithstanding the setback, Tobagonians expressed a strong desire for autonomy, promoting renewed commitment from the PNM and well-meaning Tobagonians. Under the leadership of Mr. Orville London as Chief Secretary and supported by Tobago patriot, the late Mr. Ochoy Charles, the focus returned to advancing Tobago's autonomy, culminating in the development of the Tobago Constitution Amendment Bill, which was approved by the Assembly and transmitted to the Cabinet en route to the Parliament for debate. And I want to just stop to again remind Tobagonians of the difference in the process. So you had the Kamala situation where she ignored the bills that were sent from the Tobago House of Assembly, but you have the PNM process where these bills that were sent from Tobago received the respect that it deserved. It was accepted untouched no amendments, no trouble, and laid in the parliament. And it's being laid in the parliament, it was put to a joint select committee of the parliament. And Madam Presiding Officer, for our listeners, I want to elucidate on what the joint select committee of the parliament is. Because, there's a talk going around that this is the PNM bill, and the PNM take away this, and the PNM didn't leave this in, and the Joint Select Committee of Parliament includes members from all cross-section of the Parliament, including members from the government, members from the opposition, and members from the independent bench. And of course, in this instance, we had, as part of this committee, representing the independent senators, one of Tobago's most distinguished persons in the person of Dr. Maria Dillon Remy, who was part of all these discussions that birthed these two pieces of legislation. And I don't think we can get a more independent-minded Tobagonian than Dr. Maria Dillon Remy. So if we are saying the bills aren't good, and it's the PNM, then we are also, in the same breath, saying that Dr. Remy does not have a heart for Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago Constitutional Amendment Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill have been languishing in the committee stage of Parliament since June 2021, while the people of Tobago have been waiting for these critical steps towards self-government. The so-called friends of this current THA administration, the UNC, they have signaled their intention to reject these bills. And you know what is even more disingenuous about their rejection? They stood behind the utterances of the current Chief Secretary, who outrightly told the UNC, gave them the legs to reject the bills by saying Tobago don't want this bill. But at no point in their discussions, they looked and made contributions as to how these bills can be improved where they may see flaws. And that is what parliaments, as I know it, are for. When you have legislation, you look at the legislation, and where there are areas to improve the legislation, you have meaningful debate. And if you are serious about coming to a conclusion that will benefit the people of Tobago, then you will debate, you would make recommendations, and then you would have consensus and you would approve. But the UNC is hiding behind the cloak of those that would come here today to say to Tobago, simply reject the bills. Madam Presiding Officer.
Minority Leader, before you go any further, I'm going to remind all members of Standing Order 45.5, imputing improper motives against any member of the House. No, I'm not saying that's what you're saying.
No, understood.
But I'm just guiding you all accordingly. And if you don't know what imputing means, I looked it up. It means to assign value to something or someone by inference. So please be guided accordingly as you move forward. Everyone, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And I keep referring to the bills, the bills, the bills. But I know, and there may be a number of Tobagonians still not familiar with all the details of the bills. But what I will attempt to do here in this period of my contribution is simply kind of give Tobago a general understanding as to what these bills is seeking to achieve. And I also want to remind Tobagonians that if you simply go online and Google the Tobago Constitution Amendment Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill, you may get a GSC report that is not reflective of the current bills that are in front of the Parliament. In fact, I have the most recent report that is it, and that was given to us, I remember, on our visit to the Parliament, and therefore it is a far superior document to anything that you would find online. So I'd encourage persons, if you could get to the Parliament, that is where, or contact your representatives, that is where they may be able to share with you the content of this final bill. Madam Presiding Officer, the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill, for the average Tobagonian trying to understand what these bills are really about, I want you to think of these bills as a house. You have a foundation, being the Constitution Amendment Bill, and then you have the superstructure, the walls, the windows, the things that you see that makes the house livable, and that is the Tobago Island Government Bill. The foundation is crucial. It supports everything above it, just as the Constitution Amendment Bill supports and entrenches all the powers that the Tobago Island Government will have. First, let's look at the Constitution Amendment, Tobago Self-Government Bill. This bill aims to grant Tobago self-government by creating the Tobago Island Government. So no longer you would have the Tobago House of Assembly. It establishes two key bodies, the House of Assembly, which will make laws, and the Tobago Executive Council, which will handle the island's executive administration and management. This bill consists of 21 clauses, and because it proposes fundamental changes to our Constitution, it requires a special majority to pass. This means it needs the approval of at least 3/4 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate. Now, why is this important, Madam Presiding Officer? It is important because one of the key provisions, Clause 4, for instance, recognizes the right to self-determination for the people of Tobago. This is about ensuring that we as Tobagonians have a voice in our own governance and that our status is equal to that of anyone living in Trinidad. Even further, Madam Presiding Officer, Clause 8 allows our Tobago Legislature for the first time to create laws that fit our unique needs and circumstances. This bill essentially creates the legal framework for autonomy, ensuring that Tobago's needs and aspirations are prioritized. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to the Tobago Island Government Bill. This bill is akin, as I said, to the superstructure of the House. It will replace the Tobago House of Assembly Act and lay out the powers and functions of the Tobago Island Government and its legislature. This bill is broader, containing 61 clauses, and it only requires a simple majority to pass. This means it can be approved with a straightforward vote, making it more accessible. And the important considerations why the Constitution Amendment Bill is important is because that is the anchor. That is where it entrenches all your provisions, and it provides protection against any administration, any central government arbitrarily taking away those to which they have given you. And that is why the Kamla Bill, again, could not work, because it did not entrench in the Constitution these powers. And therefore, this is the first time the Tobago House of Assembly Act and its various pillars will be entrenched in the Constitution. This is why the government could have easily gone and changed the Tobago House of Assembly from 12 seats to 15 seats with a simple majority, because the Tobago House of Assembly Act is not entrenched in the Constitution, and that was a simple majority. As a matter of fact, almost every clause in the Tobago House of Assembly Act as we currently know it, except for the Tobago House of Assembly itself, can be changed by a simple majority. And therefore, it is important. We also, I'm hearing, I saw something on Facebook and I found it so reprehensible that a learned person no less the figure of the Deputy Chief Secretary, would so callously mislead Tobagonians, telling Tobagonians that the bills give Tobago 0 miles. 0, Madam Presiding Officer. Why would somebody be so dishonest? Madam President, and I'm making, let me put it into context.
Minority Leader,
okay.
I
Okay,
know we are
no
aware.
problem, I take it back, I take it back.
Have a seat. Let me just address this once and for all. Everyone is aware of what parliamentary and unparliamentary language is. It's something that I'm not going to allow in this House. Dishonest happens to be one of them. So I know that you could find a suitable synonym.
No.
Thank you.
No problem, I stand guided, I retract as well. But why would you call so much bacchanal when the bills are here with the writing? It's 11 nautical miles. It's actually an improvement from 6. And the thing about it, they're selling this like if the bills attempt to define Tobago from Trinidad. That is not the purpose of the definition. The definition is simply for administrative purposes. It is where the powers of the Assembly actually has the lawful remit. Because the laws of the international advice is clear. Once we remain a union and once our intentions are to remain together, then you cannot be apart. You cannot draw, when you become husband and wife, can you separate, this is my car from your car? You may want to believe so. But at the end of the day, if something happens to you, whose car it is? It's the car of the husband. So if you're in a union, in a marriage, we are Trinidad and Tobago, it means therefore that everything that is owned within the maritime space of Trinidad and Tobago is owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and that is why the clause that gives us equality of status is the important clause, because it means, therefore, the average Tobagonian has equal access and importance and rights to whatever is owned by Trinidad and Tobago as the Trinidadian that seeks to also exist within the relationship Trinidad and Tobago. So then, how could you go about giving people the impression that somebody going and try to take away something from you? And now let me ask them the question, because I want them to answer. If you are taking away something in this bill, what is it that you now have that this bill will somehow take away? I want the secretary, the Deputy Chief Secretary, to tell me what is it in this bill that would disenfranchise Tobagonians that is currently in the THA Act. I challenge you on that. Additionally, the claim that these bills would disenfranchise Tobago from its rightful resource is misleading, as I said, unless this administration plans to secede. Because it's only through separation you can then define, because when people leaving a marriage, then you start to share up things, eh? So I don't know if they have planned to leave the union, and if you all have planned to leave the union, be brave about it. Be brave about it. And let Tobagonians decide if they want to leave with you. But you cannot be fighting two different fights all at the same time. You cannot be fish and fowl. So I ask again, once our intention is to remain together, then our intention should be to see how best we can get as much as possible out of the relationship. Because the learned trade unionists here, I'm sure he would tell you, when they go into negotiation, they would usually go in with their best case. But by the time the negotiations are completed, they are compromised on both sides. And therefore, this is how I hope the average Tobagonian would view this situation. That yes, we sent down a constitution amendment bill and we asked for the best case. And of course, after deliberations by persons in the parliament utilizing various advice, they have come with a bill that gives us almost most of what we asked for, with the exception of some minor adjustments. The Chief Secretary is on record as saying the bills are good bills. except that they need minor adjustments. And if that is the case, why can't we have a simple agreement and discussion to, in principle, support the bills, while at the same time, if you all want, you have friends, you can recommend to your friends what the issues are that you want changed. And that is how I believe if anybody is serious about us really getting these bills passed, that is how we'll approach it. But from what I saw on Facebook, this seemed like an all-out war. And what I know about war, nobody really wins a war. Nobody wins a war. Madam Presiding Officer, let me just simply, for the average Tobagonian, explain to them some of the tangible benefits of these bills. Far too long, the refrain has been that Tobago doesn't get enough money. We hear it every day, every day, every day. The Secretary of Finance just come and she's singing the refrain better than Super Blue. Madam Presiding Officer, that ends here. These bills guarantee Tobago a minimum of 6.8% of national revenue, almost $4 billion. And the point is, we just had a budget exercise where the ask was 5.8%, or less than about 3.1 or 3.2 billion dollars. And this bill guarantees you don't have to beg, you don't have to fight, you don't have to cost nobody. And it is entrenched. You are guaranteed a minimum of 6.8%, or at least $4 billion. But what does that mean? Because that is just figures. What does $4 billion mean, Madam Presiding Officer, for the average Tobagonian? This means that the excuses stop now. The THA can no longer say that they don't have enough money to pave your roads. They can no longer say they don't have enough money, my good friend over there, to build affordable homes. Because I've been watching him work for the last 3 years and he ain't working at all because the people ain't getting no house. Madam Presiding Officer, Madam Presiding Officer, Madam Presiding Officer, or deliver the services you, the people of Tobago, rely on. When you go to Division of Health, they can't tell you there's no money to provide grants for burial assistance and grants for food card, grants for your rent. They can't tell you that anymore because they will be well-resourced. With these bills, there will be enough funding to meet your basic needs.
Assemblyman Morris, you have 5 minutes.
No problem. Create jobs and fund meaningful development. The cry of not enough money will be a thing of the past. Take the recent property tax issue, for example. The Secretary of Finance has flagged concerns that Tobago isn't mentioned in the new property tax bill. Well, Madam Presiding Officer, these bills fix that. Because under the new responsibilities of the Tobago House of Assembly, Tobago will collect its own property taxes. So that solves that issue at its core. Madam Presiding Officer, let's look at development. We heard about grand plans for redeveloping Scarborough, but where's the money coming from? With the Fiscal Review Commission in place, large-scale projects can finally get the funding they deserve, because these bills give us access to funding beyond the regular development allocation, making real development projects a reality. Because in addition to the Fiscal Review Commission, you can borrow without the Minister of Finance reasonably withholding that approval. And you also have the ability to now invest, so you can be futuristic in your planning and development for Tobago. And when it comes to lawmaking, these bills grant us the ability to create laws specific to Tobago's needs. No more waiting on Parliament to pass bylaws for issues like marine parks or tourism regulations. We will have the power to create laws that directly benefit our island right here in Tobago and have them signed off by the President. So we no longer have to go through Cabinet, go through Parliament, then go to the President. We have direct access. It's like how the Son has direct access to the Father. We would have direct access to the President. Madam Presiding Officer, these provisions translate into real everyday benefits for everyone, from the business owners to the farmers, from the young graduates to the elderly. This is Tobago finally getting what it needs to thrive. Madam Presiding Officer, let me make this clear. If this administration continues to reject these bills, they are in fact rejecting every one of you. They are turning their backs on the future of Tobago and blocking the very funding, the powers and opportunities that will transform our island. If they truly care about Tobago's best interests, they would support these bills. But if they choose to stand in the way, let it be known, they are abandoning the people of Tobago. They are choosing party over progress. Madam Presiding Officer, the future of Tobago is right in front of us. These bills are key to unlocking that future. Let's not allow anyone to gamble with that. Madam Presiding Officer, the question is, would we support to allow Tobago to win, or would we reject so that Tobago will lose? Madam Presiding Officer, we are faced with this critical choice, a choice that will determine our future. It's a choice between supporting the bills which offer substantial benefits for our island, or rejecting them, which will only serve to continue our disenfranchisement. So I ask you, would you prefer, and I want to speak to the people of Tobago, because it's a critical comparison between what we currently have that exists and what is proposed for us to get. Would you prefer to continue with a minimum allocation of 4.03% and 4.4%, which approximates to about 2.3 billion, which can be arbitrarily changed by the central government? Or would you prefer a guaranteed budgetary allocation of 6.8% or $4 billion that no central government can alter arbitrarily? Would you prefer to operate under the current THA Act, which is not entrenched in the Constitution? Or would you rather have a properly amended Constitution that guarantees the Tobago Island Government Bill and all its provisions are entrenched? Would you prefer a THA with no lawmaking powers as currently exists? Or would you prefer a THA with lawmaking powers that is firmly entrenched in the Constitution, allowing us to create laws that govern our business? Would you prefer a THA with no fiscal review commission and limited options for additional funding, or a THA with a fiscal review commission that increases our borrowing capabilities and investment potential? Would you prefer a THA with limited control over public services, or would you prefer a THA with full control over its public services?
Assemblyman Morris, your time has expired. Yes, Minority
Madam
Councillor.
Presiding Officer, I beg to move that the speaking time of the member be extended by a further 10 minutes.
According to the standing orders, the mover of the motion isn't provided additional speaking time unless it's from the assembly whole. So his speaking time has elapsed. Right? Do you so move your motion?
I so move.
Do we have a seconder? Do we have a seconder?
Yes, Madam. Yes, Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to second the motion moved by the minority leader and reserve my time to speak at a later time.
Honorable members, the question proposed is, whereas the Tobago House of Assembly THA is constitutionally mandated to govern and manage the affairs of Tobago in accordance with Act 40 of 1996. And whereas Act 40 of 1996 provided enhanced authority to the Tobago House of Assembly, its provisions have not yet delivered the full level of autonomy sought by Tobagonians. And whereas for over 3 decades, successive efforts to achieve consensus both within and outside Parliament have failed to secure the passage of bills that would grant Tobago the desired autonomy. And whereas the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has announced that the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to vote in Parliament. And whereas these bills represent a historic step forward, proposing substantive improvement to Tobago's autonomy and authority, including the establishment of the Tobago Legislature and the entrenchment of core provisions of Tobago's self-governance. Be it resolved that this House acknowledges that the provisions of these bills will have far-reaching and positive impacts on powers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the quality of life for all Tobagonians. Be it further resolved that this House unequivocally supports the swift and unhindered passage of these bills into law, recognizing that any further delay would perpetuate the long-standing disenfranchisement of the people of Tobago. And be it further resolved that this House endorses all necessary actions to ensure the passage of these bills, including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the THA and Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment without further amendment. Assemblyman Dr. B. Israel, you may now join the debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. It's an honor to stand to join this debate because, as the minority leader indicated, this truly is a momentous occasion. And it is one that I hope will get us closer to where we need to be as it relates to Tobago, getting the mechanism that would allow us true self-determination. Madam Presiding Officer, though, I would like to start by just doing something that might actually be a little bit out of character for myself. I want to go back a little bit and discuss a little bit of history so that we could get some context of where we are. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to draw our attention to the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the 9th of March 2018, where the Honorable Keith Rowley laid the constitutional amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018, and it was an act to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to accord self-government to Tobago, to repeal the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503, and for related matters. As I said, Madam Presiding Officer, this was in March the 18th. Madam Presiding Officer, coincidentally, when the Honorable Keith Rowley laid that bill, he also presented a very lengthy statement. And that statement, Madam Presiding Officer, while it is on the Hansard of the Parliament, it is also on the Office of the Prime Minister's page, as in website. And it says here, the history, evolution, and current status of internal self-government for Tobago is the title of the paper that he presented. A statement by Prime Minister the Honorable Keith Rowley at the 21st sitting of the House of Representatives today. Back then it was Friday the 9th of March 2019. Now it's a pretty lengthy document, Madam Presiding Officer, so I won't go through it. But it actually is a very good for those of us who are interested in understanding the history of this Tobago self-determination struggle. It is actually quite a good history lesson. So I would really encourage everyone to go back and to read exactly what the Prime Minister then said. Because it speaks about the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the evolution post-independence. It speaks about the Simongal Bill, how we actually got to the bills, the acts that we have now. It also speaks about the Green Paper in 2012 and the public consultations that happened on the Green Paper. It also speaks about the THA Commission in 2012 and so forth. I mean, it goes into quite a detailed document. It speaks about the Constitution Amendment Bill of 2013, the same bills that the members were talking about and so forth. And it also speaks about the brief review of the establishment of the Forum of Political Leaders, something that the member also spoke about a bit. But I want to read in particular, Madam Presiding Officer, where it says, following the formation of the Forum of Political Leaders, it says, more than 40 meetings were held with groups, individuals, and sectors throughout Tobago and in Trinidad from January 2014, Madam Presiding Officer, to October 2016. After several public meetings, public consultations, and public education programs, the convention was held on the 14th of September 2014 at Signal Hill Secondary School. A number of the issues were identified as fundamental to an equitable relationship between the two islands in the sovereign democratic nation of Trinidad and Tobago. These were, and he outlines 4 of them. A, equality of status between the two islands and a legislative framework reflecting such equality. I repeat, equality of status between the two islands, right? B, a federal type system of governance. C, definition and delineation of the boundaries of each island in accordance with the Constitution. And D, Madam Presiding Officer, the responsibility of the Tobago administration to formulate and implement policy on all matters affecting the lives of Tobago, the lives of people resident in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. And it continues, following the convention, a comprehensive report was submitted by the Secretariat, which recorded the series of consultations conducted, and it ends with basically saying, so many of these things happened. The election happened in 2015. It spoke about what the PNM manifesto said in 2015, which included, by the way, engaging the national government to facilitate efforts to achieve democratic self-government for Tobago in keeping with the aspirations of the people of Tobago, and so forth. He then says, later down, that he made an announcement while he was attending a function at Bishop's High School in 2015, and he spoke about his commitment to continuing this process and so forth. In the end, Madam Presiding Officer, he spoke about the fact that the forum, no, let me go back a little bit. A briefing document entitled Tobago's Position on its Right to Self-Determination was dispatched to me as the new Prime Minister in January 2016, Madam Presiding Officer. The services of several individuals, included Mr. Gilbert Peterson, Ingrid Melville, and a couple others, were part of it, and they held a convention that happened in Lambo in 2016. The forum proceeded to draft legislation to accomplish the deliverables outlined in the resolution in the September convention. They included having 27 meetings among members of the forum, and included, in essence, plenty talking happened in Tobago to get us to this point. It says, oh, these discussions resulted in the creation of 2 draft constitution amendment bills. In essence, there was a Bill A and a Bill B. And then it says, after such extensive consultations and the achievement of consensus, the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, the Honorable Orville London, piloted a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to accord self-governance to Tobago and for matters incidental to at the 48th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly in the 2013-2017 session, which was held on the 27th of October 2017. The bill was unanimously passed in the House, and the then Chief Secretary, Mr. Orville London, in essence, sent the bill to Trinidad. These are the words of the Prime Minister, in essence, as he was laying. The final part of what he says is current status. The Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill was developed after a very long and transparent process of research, extensive public consultations, and a genuine desire to advance and improve the process of granting further autonomy to the island of Tobago within the context of the sovereign democratic state of Trinidad and Tobago. The bill was submitted to Cabinet and is hereby presented to the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, this Honorable House, as the aspiration of the people of Tobago. This is what the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley said at that time. If you go back to the parliamentary website and you click on the links, it will take you to the bill that the Honorable Keith Rowley presented at that time. And I just want to highlight a couple of the areas of importance of that bill, Madam Presiding Officer. Section 5 said the Constitution is amended for inserting after Section 1 the following section. 1A, there shall be equality of status between the island of Trinidad and the island of Tobago within the sovereign democratic state. And I'm stressing the word island because we are talking about equality of status between the island, Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer. Again, let me very quickly go through another piece that was critical. Again, if you go to the link, this is I literally downloaded it yesterday, Madam Presiding Officer. The Tobago Statute shall have in effect in Tobago, Little Tobago, St. Giles, Marbles Island, Goat Island, Sister Island, and such areas of the archipelagic waters of Trinidad and Tobago, including any islands, the seabed, and the subsoil that lies within 11 miles from the low water mark of Tobago. So that document spoke about 11 miles from the low water mark of Tobago. So in essence, everything that is the island and 11 nautical miles going out. It also spoke about, coincidentally, Madam Presiding Officer, having 15 assemblymen, which may have been where that came from when we made that change, 2021, to break the deadlock, and the councillors. It also included, Madam Presiding Officer, this is important because the minority leader, spoke about the importance of the Fiscal Review Commission. Fiscal, not physical. Fiscal Review Commission. And it would have included the chairman of the Fiscal Review Commission, who shall be appointed by the President in his discretion after consultation with the Chief Sec and the Prime Minister. The Fiscal Review Commission would have also included 2 members appointed by the Tobago Executive Council and 2 members appointed by the Cabinet. So if you read that carefully, that's 5 members. 1 who is the chair, and 2 from Cabinet, 2 from Tobago, right? So that was a 5-member committee known as the Fiscal Review Commission. So, this is a document. This is the bill that when you click on the Hansard on the office of on the parliamentary website, Madam Presiding Officer, this is the document that is there. We, of course, did not hear anything about this for quite some time after. For long after, Madam Presiding Officer. And I would just ask Tobagonians to consider the fact that every time we seem to hear about this, coincidentally just happens to be just before an election time. But that's okay, Madam Presiding Officer, because as I said at the beginning, I'm actually excited by the fact that we are here now doing this because it means we are going a step further. And, you know, unless the election is called next week, the general election, you know, maybe this is not in the middle of election season and the general election will not be until, well, I guess the senator said, 2026. So maybe this time we are wrong. But we're hoping. But Madam Presiding Officer, it's important to note that for a long time after, we had not heard anything about that until, as a member of the House in 2021, I received an email, June 1st, 2021, at 8:24 p.m., and the subject was Meeting invitation, Friday, 4th of June, 2021 at 3 p.m. Dr. B. Israel, I write on behalf of the GSC Constitutional Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2020. I have been directed to invite the Forum of Political Leaders in Tobago and assembly persons to the next meeting of the committee to be held virtually on June the 4th. So remember, this email came on June the 1st, and the meeting would have been, Madam Presiding Officer, on June the 4th. So we thought, great, good, it moving, finally. We assumed, for example, that the documents that we were talking about would have been the documents that were on the parliamentary website, Madam Presiding Officer, because that is the document we are talking about. I am thinking now, though, as I listen to the minority leader, that, there may also be other documents somewhere else that the minority leader has access to that the rest of us do not have access to. And if the rest of us do not have access to it, it means that the average Tobagonian does not have access to it, which makes it even more difficult to agree to something that we do not even know what is in the document. But anyway, I digress, Madam Presiding Officer. So we were preparing, excited to go to this June 4th meeting, Madam Presiding Officer. And then on Thursday, June 3rd at 8:06 p.m., I get another email. Remember, Madam Presiding Officer, the meeting that we are to go to is on the 4th. And on the 3rd at 8:06 p.m., Madam Presiding Officer, there's another email that came, and that email said, Dear Dr. Faith B. Israel, on behalf of the committee, blah, blah, blah. Basically, here attached, please find attached the bills that we will be discussing at the meeting tomorrow. Madam Presiding Officer, 8:06, the night before the meeting. The 3rd, the meeting is the 4th. 8:06, the night of the 3rd is when I got that meeting of June, Madam Presiding Officer. So because, maybe in that time we were not in the executive, we really didn't have plenty thing to do. At 8:06 p.m., we all said, oh, wow, look at this new document. Let me open it before we go to the meeting tomorrow. Only to open the document, Madam Presiding Officer, to realize that the document that was sent in that email at 8:06 p.m. are documents that look very different to the one we thought we were going to be having a discussion about, Madam Presiding Officer. So when we started reading, Madam Presiding Officer, we recognized that we were going to be working with two documents. The minority leader rightly described them. The first is the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill. And as the minority leader said, this was to amend the Constitution. And as the minority leader rightly said, amending the Constitution requires a special majority, meaning you need 3/5 and 2/3 to get it done, which is wonderful. Which means, Madam Presiding Officer, that anytime you need, because the Constitution is such a weighted document, it cannot be changed flippantly. You need people to come together. You need the government, the whole of government, to come together in essence to agree on those changes. The whole of Parliament. Thank you for that correction. So when we started reading, Madam Presiding Officer, that first document, I remember this is the one, Madam Presiding Officer, that requires the whole of Parliament, in essence, to agree to. We recognized very quickly preamble number 4, where it says the preamble of the Constitution is amended by inserting after the following. It speaks to, yes, as the minority leader did highlight, recognizing the right of self-determination of the people of Tobago. The minority leader flippantly went over, though, the other part that says, recognize the equality of status between the people of the island of Trinidad and the people of the island of Tobago, enabling them fair access. Madam Presiding Officer, if we go back to what everything the people of Tobago have actually said before, we did not have any concern about, as people, not having fair access or as people not being equal to Trinidadians. That was never the concern, Madam Presiding Officer. What we have always asked for is equality of status between the island Trinidad and the island Tobago, not the people in the island in Trinidad and the people in the island in Tobago. So we looked at this and we thought, wow, if we put this, Madam Presiding Officer, in the Constitution, it means that it will take the whole of Parliament again to change it. And we were very, very clear that that was one of the areas we did not want in the Constitution in particular, because that is not what the people of Tobago said it wanted, Madam Presiding Officer. It also included, for the purposes of several sections, and those are the sections, Madam Presiding Officer, that treat with lawmaking powers in essence, a reference to Tobago, because, you know, if we're talking about making laws for Tobago, we need to define what we mean by when we say the word Tobago. With reference to Tobago, it means the island of Tobago, Little Tobago, St. Giles Island, Marble Island, Goat Island, Sister Island, and the internal and inland waters of Tobago. Internal and inland waters in Tobago. And I really, really wish the minority leader was in here to hear me explain. So when I say that the document took away the water outside, it's because the document actually said internal and inland waters, which by any reasonable deduction means that the 6 nautical miles, for example, that the current Tobago House of Assembly Act gives us would have been taken away, because it specifically said internal and inland waters, Madam Presiding Officer. And that, of course, we had a significant challenge with, because those of us who know anything about what is going on out there, you know, we remember hearing our older folks talk about seeing the flares that are going up, in the waters around Tobago. And I understand that there was actually a past chief secretary who said, nah, don't worry about that, it don't have nothing going on out there. But we are seeing it. Our fishermen are telling us there's stuff happening out there. I mean, I may never see it because I'm not going out on a pirogue to go and see it. But there are things happening out there, and there are flares going up, and it is in the waters that are close, Madam Presiding Officer, to Tobago. So, it says, Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to lawmaking powers, and again, I go back to the fact that these are the things that were going to be in the Constitution. That is a critical part. Because it means that if we got this into the Constitution, it would have been kind of very, very, very difficult to get them out. It says, Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to lawmaking powers, that is section 53 of the Constitution, would be amended to basically give Tobago, and which we really appreciate, the Tobago Legislature would make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Tobago with respect to the matters prescribed, which we absolutely wonderful, amazing. But it also says, Madam Presiding Officer, Part 6, at any time, meaning whenever, when is expressed, declared in any act passed by the Parliament that a provision of that act being a provision that relates to a matter prescribed under Section 2, as it relates to Tobago, meaning as it affects Tobago, the interest of external affairs, the interest of national security, relation to the state of public emergency, relation to national financial crisis, that the Parliament, the Cabinet, those on the other side would be able, whatever their law is, would supersede ours. Now, the thing about that is most of that may not have been an issue, but for example, when they talk about state of public emergency, is it that, for example, the oil spill would have been a state of public emergency? And because it said at any time, we were not the ones who were deciding. See if the document included a definition, for example, of when we say emergency, what we're talking about, we would have limited, or we would have a better understanding of what that means. So those were some of the areas, Madam Presiding Officer, that would have been in the Constitution Amendment Bill. The Tobago Island Government Bill also included very, very detailed prescriptions, Madam Presiding Officer. And the learned individuals at that time were basically saying, you know, some of the things we are going back and forth about, some of the things are not perfect. It may actually work better for us to just have a broad thing that says, Tobago, you have the authority to create your own governance, and then allow the people of Tobago to come back and say whether it wants, for example, the People's House, whether it wants a Senate, whether it wants whatever those things are by bicameral system. That was one of the things that came up at that time, even before that time, that we needed to take into consideration. Something else, Madam Presiding Officer, that the minority leader so eloquently spoke about is this idea of the 6.8% of the total appropriation by Parliament. And that in a fiscal year, or such other percentage to be determined by the Fiscal Review Committee, right? The Fiscal Review Committee. So we thought, let us go into this. We can't get everything that we want. That is fine. Let us see, even though right now the current Dispute Resolution Commission gives us up to the 6.9%, but we understand the argument about being 6.8 at minimum, but it will have to go to this Fiscal Review Commission. And we kept reading, only to realize that the Fiscal Review Committee, remember the first one we said included the chairman, who the president in essence had to pick, and then 2 members from the THA, 2 members from the cabinet, from the central government. This document then says that shall be established a fiscal review committee which shall comprise, Madam Presiding Officer, a chairman who shall be the minister with responsibility for finance, a deputy chair who shall be the secretary with responsibility for finance, 1 member appointed by the Tobago Executive Council, so that is 1, 2, 3 people, yeah, and 2 members appointed by the cabinet. So we now have a fiscal review committee, Madam Presiding Officer, that is now heavily lopsided.
Member, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And we thought to ourselves, the minister is already the chair. Sure, the vice chair would be the secretary, 1 other person from the THA, and 2 people from the cabinet. So we would have already had a fiscal review committee that already, they didn't even have to listen to us, Madam Presiding Officer. They could have already voted to say 0, zilch, nothing more for all year, because that is what the fiscal review committee came up with. Madam Presiding Officer, there are several other things that are a part of this document that we looked at on the 3rd of June, going into the meeting on the 4th of June. And this is what gave us on the 4th of June the impetus to say to the Joint Select Committee back then, 1, we appreciate this conversation, Madam Presiding Officer, but 2, these 2 documents that you all are coming with are not the documents that we thought we were going to come to this meeting with, because these are not the documents that our dear Prime Minister was speaking about back then. In particularly since, Madam Presiding Officer, the Prime Minister, in his words, indicated that he understood the key things that the people of Tobago, after all of those months and months and months and years and years and years and meetings and meetings and meetings, said that we wanted, Madam Presiding Officer. And these were non-negotiable. As a matter of fact, he is the one who indicated that these were the things that were non-negotiable. These were the things that the people of Tobago, he said he's a proud Tobagonian, Madam Presiding Officer. These were the things that proud Tobagonian acknowledged that we needed. So, Madam Presiding Officer, it is passing strange, Madam Presiding Officer, that we are here again at this point, on the heels, or maybe not on the heels, of a general election, on the heels and maybe not on the heels of a Tobago House of Assembly election, because we understand that there may be a plot to have this passed, which will then force the Tobago House of Assembly to come to an end, which will then make this to be on the heels of a Tobago House of Assembly election, rather than the general, Madam Presiding Officer. If that is indeed the case, it is unfortunate, Madam Presiding Officer, that this House is being asked to vote on behalf of the people of Tobago by the minority leader to agree on a motion that explicitly states that there are things in the bills that are in the House down there now that we actively do not want, Madam Presiding Officer. And I am going to say to Tobago and Tobagonians, Madam Presiding Officer, that you should never forgive the people who are trying to hoodwink you and the people who are trying to say to you that all you're stupid.
Member.
Retracted, Madam Presiding
Thank you.
Officer. The people who are trying to say to you that all of the meetings you went to and all of the consultations that you went to and all of those things. And because of that, Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to place on record that the members of the executive are making or are going to propose an amendment to the bill, to the motion, Madam Presiding Officer. And that amendment, Madam Presiding Officer, will include a couple shifts. The first amendment to the third recital includes leaving out the word 3 and inserting the word 5, Madam Presiding Officer. The second amendment to the fourth recital, the words proposed are, bills to grant Tobago the long-denied autonomy will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament, be inserted after the word that, and the words constitutional amendment Tobago self-government be left out completely, Madam Presiding Officer. That the third amendment be to the fifth recital, and that proposes to include the word should before the word represent, and that the fourth amendment is to the last resolution, and we propose to insert the words with necessary amendments and leave out the words without further amendments, Madam Presiding Officer. With that, I ask those of us, all right-thinking Tobagonians, to not allow the promise of a little bit to be dangled in front of you while they are taking away everything in the back of you and thinking that you are not smart, Madam Presiding Officer. With that, I thank you.
Is there a seconder to these amendments?
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to second the proposed amendments so laid by the Honorable Deputy Chief Secretary.
Honorable members, the amendment to the motion has been seconded by Assemblyman Hackett. Honorable House, the question proposed is that the motion be amended by First Amendment to the third recital, leaving out the word 3 and the word proposed be inserted 5. Second Amendment to the fourth recital, words proposed, bills to grant Tobago the long-denied autonomy will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament be inserted after the word that and the words Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government be left out. Third Amendment to the fifth recital, propose to insert the word should before the word represent. Fourth Amendment at the last resolution, propose to insert the words with necessary amendment and leave out the words without further amendment. Members contributing to the debate may either speak on the substantive motion or the proposed amendment. I recognize Secretary James. You may now join this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, as always, I stand in the House on the vote of members of the public who live in the constituency of Scarborough Mount Grace and who has allowed me to be here to represent them and to represent Tobago. In preparation for my intervention in this motion, Madam Presiding Officer, I looked for the politically correct terms to describe part of the contextual milieu of this motion. But I could not find definitions for political Alzheimer's or political dementia. But I did find hypocrisy, duplicity, and two-tonguedness. As for terms not so politically correct, I found that it was not applicable to describe someone as politically senile. Although the mover of the motion and the PNM reps in general hope Tobagonians have short memory. Allow me to read from Hansard of another place. Quote, "The reason why this Tobago House of Assembly Act 1996, is no good is because the UNC government, hustling to try and gain some points in the Tobago House of Assembly elections, aborted the work of the Joint Select Committee and destroyed the promise of constitutional guarantees for the people of Tobago." That's Colum Inbert, 20 years ago. Hypocrisy, duplicity, and two-tonguedness. Today they come to say, vote for a bill that has been rejected, that they're not going to change, not even a sentence in, and tell us, vote for it because we have to take little and live long. We have to make baby steps. Madam Presiding Officer, if I were to take the motion serious, or even half serious, I would say that we've been asked to accept pieces of proposed legislation that are known to be fraught with errors in the hope that we can get a little money, that we can, sometime in the future, ask another government, maybe 100 years from today, ask another government, let me amend this. We in Tobago have been at this game of trying to represent ourselves and the aspirations of Tobagonians since 1895. That's almost 6 years after the Union. Trying. Bigard came on the scene in the 1920s. We had a House of Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago where there was no Tobagonian for 20-something years. And then we had one Tobagonian for another 30-something years. To get to the place today where we have 39 members and 2 Tobagonians. And we must somehow accept that this dogmatic colonialist behavior by the Prime Minister should be accepted because he's too big to change. Or you could say, well, you want in Tobago, I ain't changing nothing, that's all you have to take. That is the attitude. But we have uniqueness in Tobago. And if there is one word that summarizes the Tobago ambition and the core value that is Tobagonian, it is ambition. We have ambition. It was ambition that drove Sandy to start the revolution as a slave. Ambition. Ambition that motivated him to risk his life in search of freedom. Freedom and justice. This ambition that drove Bigart and Fargo James ambition that motivated Robinson and Murray, ambition which is so faithfully served as a guiding light to our forefathers, must now be the singular focus of all Tobagonians. We must come to the place when the Tobago ambition gets to the fore. The ambition that must lead Tobago and all of Tobago to have one common intention. We have been struggling for self-determination for 140 plus years. One common intention. I've said in this house before that there are Tobagonians who have allowed a Trinidad party, and I will keep saying it, to come to Tobago and divide us. And we must come to the place in Tobago when we say no to that. You must have an ambition to stand firm in trying to pursue the Tobago agenda. The Tobago agenda is creating legislation in the parliament that we now have that allows Tobago to self-actualize. The ambition and intention must be undergirded by sound fundamental principles that help guide collective decision-making. Not PNM decision-making, but collective decision-making and governance arrangements. These bills that we are discussing and this motion we are discussing is about getting to a place where we have laws that allows us the best governance arrangements between the island of Tobago and the island of Trinidad. For governance arrangements that will determine how we make laws and formulate and implement policy, it is critical that we understand that you don't go to the House and pass any law because you have majority. You don't just do that. That is what we have. We still have a law reform committee existing for decades, and we still have sedition laws on the books because they go to the House and just do whatever they want. Governance decisions must always and everywhere extend beyond the domain of the government. Governance arrangements must include the mechanisms that allow for meaningful collaboration in legislative and policy decisions between the elected and the electors. Governance must necessarily and carefully consider the implications regarding the well-being and the welfare of children, the sustenance and prosperity of a people. And we must ask ourselves whether this arrangement between Tobago and Trinidad allows Tobago and the children of the future of Tobago to be prosperous in this union that we have. And if the answer is no, then we must reject the bills. Madam Presiding Officer, let me now get to the meat of my presentation, because I tried to listen to the members from Darrell Springwell, and it became harder and harder and harder. But I went to the tea house to get a cup of tea, and I listened from there. Tobago is caught up in a politico-legal governance arrangement where the central government in Trinidad can plan and execute policy for Trinidad and Tobago that is beneficial to Trinidad and detrimental to Tobago. Where, notwithstanding the THA Act, the central government in Trinidad can, by adverse application of the legislation, widely overrides Tobago's ability to plan and implement policy for Tobago's benefit. And I'll give examples of that in a while. And where the central government might be unable to confine or restrict Tobago using legislative mechanisms, it can still delay, stymie, obstruct, or outright prevent Tobago from properly planning and executing policy in Tobago for Tobago's benefit by withholding the necessary resources required to do so. That is the position that Tobago finds itself in. Today, the laws on the book allows for, despite the THE Act, for the Ministry of Energy to say to us at spell, we are going to tax you with royalties and prevent you from getting any license whatsoever. When the THA Act says the royalties should be paid to THA. Exactly. So the parliament, the government can just override, not the parliament, the government and the cabinet can override the parliament and therefore the laws of the country and do what they want, and therefore we must make laws that are foolproof. And that is the challenge that Tobago faces. We have come to the place now in the last 3-4 years, I believe, where Tobago is beginning to wake up. More and more, we are seeing the value of our resources in the land and in the sea and in the air. We are more and more aware of our inherent might, that is our right to self-determination. And I think there is a fear. There is a fear that we may get so fed up and frustrated with the subjugation and the colonial enslavement from Port of Spain that we may just decide, like my brother from Roxborough, Argyle, to pick up a marble and go. That is a fear that is allowing the PNM today to dangle 6.8%. The member is clear that despite the law, the member said it, despite the law that allows for the government to give us 6.9% today, the member is sure that we could only get the minimum. He called it the floor. Accepting that the government can override the laws of the parliament, and therefore we must create a foolproof law that prevents the government from so doing. The member for Belgarden Goodwood, Belgarden Glamorgan, raised the issue of the FRC. You know, we had the DRC, and we have the FRC now, saying the exact same thing. Consider separation, consider this, consider that, and then give us the minimum. The same committee, with the majority in parliament, having to sit in a dispute. Maybe, Madam Presiding Officer, they should consider an ERC, an Energy Review Commission. I don't know why they skip out the E. After D is E before you get to F. I don't know why they skip it out. Madam Presiding Officer, to make the point, in 1995, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago approved 45 million in development expenditure for Tobago. 1995. The Parliament approved it, and then the government gave $43 million. So the Parliament, the government went to the Parliament and said, listen, we are going to propose $45 million. The Parliament approved, and then the government decided. We're giving them 43 after the fact. In 1997, Parliament under UNCNR coalition approved $81 million. And maybe there's a lesson right there. The development budget jumped almost double in 2 years under a different government, because you know now, for the last 3 years, every single year, the PNM has reduced the development budget in Tobago. Every single year. And at the same time, increasing the development budget for every ministry in Trinidad. Okay. And telling the people of Tobago that the development disparity between the islands is so great that Tobago only needs less. Tobago is so developed, more than Trinidad, that Tobago needs less and Trinidad needs more. And we must take that, because Works Division build a road. So in 1997, Parliament approved $81 million, and then the government doubled that money in that fiscal year. The UNC now coalition doubled the allocation without going back to Parliament, making the point
I see no irrelevance to the presentation.
The bills of autonomy.
Yes, and member, I see no irrelevance. Assemblyman Morris, please continue.
Madam President, every time I speak in this house, I am reminded that English is a difficult language.
Continue, member.
So, the UNC doubled the allocation, and then as soon as Vincent Lass, or the next man named Griffith, crossed the floor, the next year, the UNC decided that they were going to budget $80 million, and then gave us half. So that the law allows the government, the cabinet, to override the lawmaking body, which is the Parliament, because the law is weak. And that is the critical point, you know. The law is weak today. Today, we have a situation where, I don't want to take away the Secretary of Finance presentation, but today we have a situation where the Minister of Finance, every single year, goes to a media review, increases the budget to Trinidad, and leaves the Tobago budget as it is. Because they are in government, and the Parliament apparently are powerless to stop them, because the law has not made the right governance arrangement to constrain the government and the cabinet. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, we must ensure that the laws that we make and approve in this House, and when we vote in this House, we send a clear message that we are not going to accept a piece of law that we know is flawed, in the hope that somehow in the future we will get it. We've been doing that. We've been at this House, the member for Darrell Spring took us back to 1977, when Mr. Robinson and Mr. Murray, Dr. Murray, went to the House. 1977. What he did not say is that it's the PNM who watered down the bill. That's what he didn't say. The PNM who watered down the bill. In 1996, it's the PNM who watered down the bill.
Members,
Political
please.
Alzheimer's.
I'm sure you all are aware of Standing Order 44. Please, no interruption when a member is on his feet presenting. Continue, Secretary.
Thank you for the protection, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, in fiscal 25, the Minister of Finance has budgeted $55 million less than for Tobago than they did last year. I mean, let's just imagine that. For the Division of Infrastructure, $36.5 million. It can't even pay the government workers' wages. But they have considered, as the law says, they have considered what the development needs of Tobago are, and they have determined that $205 million is what Tobago requires. Well, I tell you, the development budget.
Last sitting, and that was decided upon the allocation for Tobago, 45.3.
Be so guided, member. Please continue.
Madam President, I would like to reclaim my time. Please and thanks.
Continue.
The development budget for the country of Trinidad and Tobago allows Tobago in this budget 3.6%. What the law says? The law says 4.03 to 6.9. Because the cabinet, again, can override the parliament and do what they want. Because the THA Act and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago allow them to so do. So what can happen if we accept these bills? Let's suppose that, because the only good thing in the bill is that we have a higher guarantee. The bill offers nothing else. The bill doesn't allow us to make a law in Tobago that can stand up in Trinidad and Tobago. Because at any time, the government in Trinidad can go and pass a law and say, your law is now void because we make a law on that issue. So the only benefit, I want to tell Tobago this, the only benefit of this thing is that they could give us a little more money and you have a higher guarantee. But what happens if in birth next year, I hear you both say that you read the next budget, decide, we pass this bill, that you need another $60 billion. But he approves, he goes to the house and gets approved $30 billion first. And at 6%, we get the same figure of $30 billion because the figure is what we would get. And then at the media review, true to form, he goes for $40 billion and gets it. And Tobago gets the same dollar figure.
Assemblyman Morris. Assemblyman James is making a presentation based on this motion. No. You do not have that authority to dictate how persons make their presentation. He is not opposing any standing orders. Assemblyman James, please continue. And I may remind you all how you all go about making interruptions. You stand on a point of order or a point of clarification. Continue.
Reclaiming my time. Madam Presiding Officer, the bills says that Parliament shall appropriate for the use of the House of Assembly in any financial year no less than 6.8% of the total sum appropriated by the Parliament in that financial year, or such other percentage as may be determined by the Fiscal Review Committee. Let me read it again, The bills say that Parliament can appropriate in a financial year any such percentage, any percentage, as may be determined by the FRC under Section 42 and approved by the Parliament by resolution. So the FRC can decide, after reviewing the thing, that, hey, you only need this amount, and this is what we're giving you. Because I've made the point already that the cabinet can disregard the parliament and do what it wants. That's what the law allows it to do, and that's what this law allows as well. So there is no guarantee. Let me say this. How the country operates now and how the laws are written, there is no guarantee to Tobago of any 6.8%. None. And it's a funny thing, you know. In the 96 Act, it is Section 42. In the Island Government Bill is Section 43 in the ATHA Act now. It's Section 42. Going over the exact same thing. The Tobago Island Government Bill is asking the FRC to give due consideration to the same things that the THA, current THA asks Cabinet to do every year. What's the sense in making a law like that? What's the sense? What's the sense in creating a committee?
Member, you have 5 minutes.
Madam Presiding Officer, let me move to energy. Because we are articulating a position that instead of a fixed percentage, we need a fair share of the revenue that is generated in this state, this democratic state called Trinidad and Tobago. A fair share. As the law stands now, the people of Tobago are half owners of NGC. The people of Tobago are half owners of CAL. Okay. We have no say in how those entities are run. But we are the owners. The people of Tobago are 100% owners of the energy resources that are in our waters. And whenever a bid round comes, the government of Trinidad and Tobago awards or sells a block of energy space to somebody, and Tobago gets zero benefit from it. That's what the law still allows. Block 22, not the one in Canaan, the one off Charlottesville, 5.8 nautical miles from Tobago, 50 nautical miles from Trinidad, controlled from Port of Spain. Block 22A, the reserves in Block 22, $43.3 trillion. Not a say we have. Block 22A, 8 to 10 miles from Tobago, 48 to 52 miles from the nearest point in Trinidad, being Toco, some point in Toco. Not a say. Block 22B, again, 7 to 10 miles from Tobago, 50 to 55 miles from Trinidad. No control. North Coast Marine Area, this is an interesting name. North Coast Marine Area, maybe it's North Coast of Trinidad, that's what Tobago is. Off the western side of Tobago. poinsettia, 22 miles from Tobago, 35 miles from Trinidad. And they've been taking revenue, when you average revenue to the new law of 35% now, they've been taking revenue of $2 million since US per day since 2009 from poinsettia. Not a say or a cent for Tobago. Shell has now run pipelines from Orchid Field and Shaconia Field that are closer to Castara than poinsettia, 7 miles I am told, to pump to the platform in poinsettia and to send to Trinidad, volumes that we don't know anything about. And we must sit in Tobago and say, Tobago cannot be delineated. Calypso Field, 10 to 15 miles from Tobago, 60 miles from Trinidad. Tobago cannot be defined. So, Justice Anthony Lucky, in an opinion, because the definition of Tobago that they don't want to put in the Constitution because Alwari, some fake lawyer, say.
Member. I'm going to remind you all again about your language in this house. I won't allow that word. And your time is actually up.
Presiding, request an additional 10 minutes of speaking time to allow the member to finish his contribution.
Honorable House members, the question is that an additional speaking time of 10 minutes be added to Mr. Assemblyman James to complete his presentation. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Member, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Justice Anthony Lucky, one of the eminent jurists in the country, says, and I quote, having looked at the drafts and so on that have been floating around since 2018, says, I have to emphasize, as I do throughout this paper, in a position paper that he wrote, that the definition of Trinidad and Tobago as set out in the Constitution should not be replaced or repealed with the draft defining each island. If Section 1 of the Constitution is repealed and replaced with the draft, I have briefly seen that there must be consequential amendments to several acts where the political entity that is the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is treated as one state. We have proposed, we, the THA, proposed in 2015, that the one state remains, but changed to a federal state. Justice Lucky is saying, that can be done, but you have to change several acts. What is wrong with changing acts? We change acts all the time. So it can be done. He goes on to say, I want to quote, nevertheless, it would be convenient, no, let me go back before that. If I see the draft bill, I should be able to provide more substantial reasons why the clauses that I refer to in general terms, if accepted, can create more problems than we initially envisaged. Nevertheless, this is the critical part, nevertheless, it would be convenient to set out Article 50 in the Convention on the Laws of the Seas, which deals with delineation of archipelagic states, waters, because it supports my view that the archipelagic waters between the islands of Trinidad and Tobago can be divided. This is Lucky saying that between Tobago and Trinidad, the waters can be divided. And the article reads, and he's quoting now Article 50 from the UNCLOS, Within its archipelagic waters, the archipelagic state may draw closing lines for the delineation of internal waters in accordance with Article 9, 10, and 11. So according to Lucky, the laws of the UN allows for Tobago to be delineated from Trinidad, and we can get, even without changing the constitution to a federal arrangement, we can get a definition of Tobago that says, listen, all you in Tobago, from this line is all you own. And from this line is we own. What is wrong with that? What is so hard that PNM people can't say, oh gosh, let me put in the definition? What's so wrong with that? We see it in front of our face. Why wait 100 years to do it? Because Keith Rowley says so? Ah, chat. You were there calling Kamala by her first name.
Members.
You were calling Kamala by her first name. You didn't hear yourself.
I'm glad I have the opportunity to address this. In as much as members of the cabinet are not members of this august chamber, I would prefer that you all address them with the respect of their office. I would not allow first name calling, last name calling. Member, please continue.
I find I get back my time, you know. I find I interrupt me, I can't get back my time. Another example, Madam Presiding Officer, and this will be my last example. CAL, which I'm theorizing that the people of Tobago, because you know they want to talk about people inside the island, the people of Tobago owns half of CAL. The people. Because we have this one state. CAL, Caribbean Airlines, have been making large forays into the region to take up what Liat left behind. To show how there are no vision. They're building an airport terminal in Tobago with no business plan. The only business plan they have is that we build it and people go come. Me I know if it's a tourist attraction they build it. But
Member relevance.
I am making the point of how the laws impact Tobago, the bills. So CAL has a flight from Tobago to Barbados today that is $700 more from Trinidad to Barbados. CAL. So the Tobagonian who doesn't want to go to Trinidad must pay $700. So effectively telling Tobagonians, listen, save $300, go to Trinidad first and come. And telling the Bajan and those who are flying through Barbados to get to Tobago, listen, go to Trinidad, you can save yourself $300. CAL. Deciding to make Grantley Adams almost like a home port for them and have 16 flights leaving and going into Barbados and can't put on a flight for Carnival. But we own half of CAL. And so, people of Tobago, we have to make laws. We have to approve laws in this house that benefit you. We have to make laws that ensures that the one ambition that we have, the one ambition that should unite everybody in Tobago, is to ensure that we are creating a law today that will stand the test of time for the next 100 years without change. And we must make a law that ensures that there is equity between the islands of Tobago and the island of Trinidad. I thank you.
First Standing Order 16-2. I now suspend this House for 30 minutes. We will resume at 1:18. 1:18.
In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean.